Deprived of boundaries and rarely disciplined, Andrew quickly grew into the classic spoiled brat. Aware of his high rank from an early age, arrogant and overbearing, he would order staff about and, according to one staff member, be a bloody nuisance. No one felt able to discipline him. He quickly learned that he could do what he wanted. Almost from the beginning, he felt a strong sense of entitlement. Tom Jackson attended a gym with the young prince. Prince Andrew was a tiresome little shit who once informed me when playing that he was a prince, said Jackson. I immediately informed him that I was actually a king, which seemed to shut him up. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise. The day has come, people. The day has come! We're about to read Entitled. This is the book about Prince Andrew and his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, although they are quite friendly to this day. And I've been waiting for this book for a really long time, and I know a lot of you have as well. But back when I was reading Trader King, and also when I was reading the book about the Mountbattens, I had the privilege of speaking to the author. We emailed a little bit back and forth because he generously had recommended this podcast, this show, to his audience and said that, you know, he was really enjoying the reading and the commentary, etc., etc., etc. And in our communication, he told me that he was working on this book and that he was sort of anticipating some issues because there was lots of people who'd been trying to gum up the works for years. Because this book has come at a huge cost. Tons of research, tons of people getting in the way, tons of people talking to him but not wanting to be on the record. It was just a whole thing. And so we had been worried the book wouldn't come out. But my people, it is here. And I think this book couldn't come at a better time because I think one of the things that we're all struggling with right now in society is the fact that we feel like there is an enormous amount of corruption at the highest levels and that the elite have, well, we've known it. We don't always have the receipts for how corrupt they are, and this is the receipts. And I think that what we are feeling in our spirit, among a lot of other things, is the fact that when our betters, when the elites are so unbelievably corrupt, it trickles down and we end up getting this sort of lethargy, this moral lethargy. Like, why should I try? Why should I continue to plod along my day-to-day when those fat cats over there are just getting rich on the blood of the people? You know what I mean? So I feel like a book like this is really important because I feel like it's calling to account the kind of behavior that has a trickle-down effect to all of us. And this kind of behavior, as though you're entitled to every abuse of power that you can manage because you won't get caught, leads to feelings of anger, resentment. We all know what's happening, and yet we can't get specific. Well, we're about to be. So, of course, this book's going to start at the very beginning, but I'm going to tell you from the very beginning, this entitled business, there's not a better word for it. Andrew, from the get-go, is really difficult to like. His pride, his self-righteousness, this sense that the world somehow owes him because he just happened to be born in the right family, it's super grating. I mean, immediately. He was a brat from day one. And I feel like he just wasn't dealt with properly because he was kind of part of the Queen's second family, you know, not literally, but, you know, she'd had her first two children, and then years later, she ends up having Andrew and Edward. Those children were treated very differently than the older two. So it's all just very interesting, but let's dive right in, shall we? All right, we're going to begin with the prologue, because prologue is always very important. Don't skip the prologue, okay? When I was a kid, I used to skip the prologue. Don't do that. The father of the groom and the mother of the bride, lovers 20 years earlier, sat in a third carriage waving to the crowds. Prince Philip and Susan Barantes, whose former husband was Prince Charles' polo manager, had been part of the same social circle for years. Now they were together publicly celebrating the marriage of Prince Andrew to Sarah Ferguson. That morning Andrew had been made Duke of York, the traditional title for the monarch's second son, and last held by the Queen's father, and also granted the Scottish and Irish titles Earl of Inverness and Baron Killyleagh. Ferguson, too, had a new coat of arms, with its prophetic motto, Ex adversus felicitas crescit. Out of adversity, happiness grows. The red-haired bride looked striking in a wedding dress designed by Linka Chirok, in ivory Duchess satin with heavy beadwork incorporating the Ferguson coat of arms, a honeybee on a thistle, and symbols such as hearts for romance and anchors and waves representing the groom's naval background. though Chirac had vetoed the bride's desire for decorative teddy bears and helicopters. The 17-foot train bore the letters A and S intertwined in silver beads. Teddy bears were also to be a motif of the wedding gifts, which included a teddy teapot and mugs, pictures of Beatrix Potter animals, ashtrays decorated with butterflies and bugs, matching tankards initialing A and S, and a dustbin with A and S and their picture on the front. Ferguson gave her new husband a 30-inch solid silver helicopter that opened up to reveal valuable miniatures, one of which was a silver teddy bear. The bride entered Westminster Abbey to a fanfare from the Royal Marines and Edward Elgar's Imperial March. Behind her as pages and bridesmaids came Peter and Zara Phillips, the children of Princess Anne, Prince William, then aged just 4, Sarah's half-brother Andrew, and a nephew, the boys in 17th-century midshipman dress uniforms or sailor suits, the girls in peach dresses. At the altar waited the Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Runcie, and Andrew, the most handsome of the Queen's children with his toothy smile, in the uniform of a naval lieutenant, with his supporter, as the royal family called the best man, his younger brother Edward, beside him. The traditional service followed the liturgy of the 1682 Book of Common Prayer, and Ferguson promised in her vows to obey her husband. The hymns included favorites such as Come Down, O Love Divine, Lead Us, Heavenly Father, Lead Us, and Handel's Music for the Royal Fireworks. And Felicity Lott sang Mozart's Laudato Dominum while the new couple signed the register. Almost 2,000 guests had filled the Abbey, among them Nancy Reagan, the racing driver Jackie Stewart, the comedian Billy Connolly and his actress wife Pamela Stephenson, Elton John and his wife Renee, Michael and Shakira Kane, Barry Humphries, the American comedian Joan Rivers, and the actor Anthony Andrews, as well as foreign royals, aristocrats, and the great and good. But there was none of Andrew's shipmates from HMS Brazen, who were in the Middle East. Security, which had cost $2 million, was tight. Armed detectives dressed as coachmen had ridden on the backs of the carriages, and 5 miles of Westminster sewers had been checked. Costs had included £220,000 on flowers, £168,000 on the reception, £20,000 on photographers, and a whopping $10,000 on the cake. When the new couple returned to Buckingham Palace for the balcony appearance, the crowds, estimated to be 250,000 people, could be seen stretching in every direction. A number itself dwarfed by the television audience of 500 million for the marriage of the monarch's handsome second son, one of the major royal events of the period. "We want a kiss! We want a kiss!" the crowd chanted. The couple cupped their hands to their ears as if they could not hear, and then obliged. The multitude roared. Next came the wedding lunch of salmon, cold lobster, lamb, strawberries and cream, and the 5-tiered 240-pound cake, which Andrew had to cut with his ceremonial sword. Sarah, however, did not have happy memories of the meal, an early indicator that royal protocol was not for her. She said it was lavish and proper and dull, that lunch. At one point we raised a glass, yet no one made a toast, for that was not traditional. I felt suddenly washed by regret. All the pomp had been fine, but I wanted to be a regular bride. I wanted Andrew's best man to get up and make a funny speech, and for someone else to say what a jolly good person I was, or how badly I'd ridden my ponies. Just after 4 p.m. the newlyweds left from the palace forecourt, their horse-drawn landau boasting a large teddy bear and a sign saying, "Phone home," for Chelsea's Royal Hospital, less than 2 miles away, where a helicopter awaited them, and then their honeymoon on board the royal yacht Britannia. The young girl had her prince. The fairy tale had come true. Oh, the spine on this book. That's creaky. Before we begin, can I just take a minute to say that I think that is wild that she even played around with the idea of having teddy bears and helicopters embroidered onto her dress. That is crazy. And I feel like if you're getting into a relationship with somebody and the motifs of this relationship would be best summarized in teddy bears and helicopters, we have problems. There's an arrested development amongst us. You know what I'm saying? All right, let's keep going. This is now the section of the book entitled Early Years, and we're going to read as far as we can until it's time for me to go. All right? So this portion is entitled Baby Grumpling. Prince Andrew was born on 19 February 1960 at Buckingham Palace, the first issue to a reigning monarch since Queen Victoria gave birth to Princess Beatrice in 1857. Christened Andrew after his paternal grandfather, Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, Albert after his maternal grandfather, Christian Edward after his two great-great-grandfathers, Christian IV of Denmark and Edward VII, he was the first royal to take the surname Mountbatten-Windsor, in defiance of a promise by which the Queen had agreed that her descendants would take the name Windsor. 2 months later he was baptized in the music room at Buckingham Palace by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher, in front of his godparents, the Duke of Gloucester, Princess Alexandra, Lord Elphinstone, the Earl of Euston, and Georgina, Lady Kennard. He had been placed under the care of a nanny, Mabel Anderson, known as Mamba, who was helped by an under-nanny, June Waller. Waller wrote to a friend, quote, "The christening went off very well. Andrew was good and didn't cry except for 2 little squeaks. He christened me before we went. I had him on the pot, not thinking, of course. He misaimed, and I went to the royal christening with a damp skirt. I'm not used to little boys yet. P.S. Andrew weighed 11 pounds 3 ounces last Monday. He alters every day and smiles beautifully." Quick side note to all the moms out there who have potty trained their kids. Apparently we're doing it wrong. They're putting this newborn on the toilet. What are we doing with diapers, you guys? It is a thing to question in this world in which there's 1,000 conspiracies. Why the diaper company wants us to think that children should be in diapers until 2. Yet this royal baby's been put on the pot when he weighs nothing but 11 pounds 3 ounces. That is a newborn. All right, continuing on. Soon after, the Queen persinkly wrote to her cousin, Lady Mary Cambridge. "The baby is adorable. All in all, he's going to be terribly spoiled by all of us, I'm sure." Andrew, born 12 years after his elder brother Charles and a decade after his sister Anne, became the first child of the Queen's, quote, second family, which was to be influential in shaping his character. By then, the Queen found it much easier to combine her royal duties with being a mother, with the result that Andrew was indulged in a way that his elder siblings, away at boarding school, were not, and treated, until the birth of his younger brother Edward, in March 1964, like an only child. The new addition to the royal family was not seen in public for the first 16 months of his life, occasioning a rumor that there might be something wrong with him. But the Queen was resolved to shield her son from public glare. From the start, he was not an easy child, and was named Baby Grumpling because of his temper tantrums, mischief, and obstinacy. He was a very energetic child indeed, one might say a boisterous child, remembered valet Stephen Barry. He was into everything, always trying to follow us downstairs where he wasn't allowed, tugging at the footmen's tailcoats, climbing to reach anything that had been put out of his reach. He was a very strong personality, and he was extremely good-looking even then. Having been a rather formal and distant mother to her 2 older children, the Queen doted on her new son and spent as much time as she could with him, supposedly teaching him the alphabet, how to count and tell the time, and bathing him. On Mabel Anderson's day off, she would babysit her 2 youngest children in the nursery, watching television with them or reading to them. But the psychologist Oliver James questioned this narrative, arguing that Andrew's parents, with their royal duties, had only limited time with their third-born. Andrew, hoiked backwards and forwards from the nursery, clearly ended up suffering from what psychologists call anxious detachment, the constant fear that loved ones would be snatched away. The consequence of all this coming and going might well be an avoidant pattern of attachment, a withdrawal from emotional closeness. Deprived of boundaries and rarely disciplined, Andrew quickly grew into the classic spoiled brat. Aware of his high rank from an early age, arrogant and overbearing, he would order staff about and, according to one staff member, be a bloody nuisance. Even the Queen described him as a bit of a handful, and not always a little ray of sunshine about the house. He was fond of practical jokes, hiding knives and forks when a footman was laying the table, tying the shoelaces of sentries, teasing his grandmother, and reputedly an Anglican bishop at Balmoral as well, with a whoopee cushion, putting itching powder in his mother's bed, turning the aerial at Buckingham Palace so she could not watch the racing at Sandown, and putting washing-up liquid in the palace pool. A valuable silver tray was used as a toboggan for sliding down palace stairs, and he would pedal furiously up and down the long red-carpeted corridors on his tricycle. For his 6th birthday, he received a miniature Aston Martin, an exact scaled-down version of the one in Goldfinger, with the number plate JB007, complete with toy machine guns and smoke system, built at a cost of £4,000. No one felt able to discipline him. He quickly learned that he could do what he wanted. Almost from the beginning, he felt a strong sense of entitlement, one not wholly shared by his siblings. With fawning staff, Lavish homes, chauffeured cars, and showing himself to be willful, exuberant, gregarious, undisciplined, and aggressive, and possessed of a limited attention span. Evelyn Muir-Bell, who worked at Windsor between 1973 and 1995, remembered him as the most troublesome royal. Tom Jackson attended a gym with the young prince, then about 6, in Pavilion Road in Chelsea, run by a Mr. Sturgis. Afterwards, the children would go on to play in Cadogan Gardens. Prince Andrew was a tiresome little shit, who once informed me, when playing, that he was a prince, said Jackson. I immediately informed him that I was actually a king, which seemed to shut him up. Initially, Andrew was taught at home by a governess, Catherine Peebles, known as Mipsy, who had done likewise for Princess Alexandra and Prince Michael 20 years earlier. Andrew was not a studious child. He was easily bored and difficult to control, in contrast to his bookish younger brother, who was quiet and well-behaved. His dance teacher remembered him distracting the other pupils because he was not interested in her class. Princess Diana, born a few months after Andrew and who knew him from early childhood, later wrote, "He was very, very noisy and loud. It occurred to me that there was something troubling him. He wasn't for me. Andrew was very happy to sit in front of the television all day, watching cartoons and videos, because he's not a doer." Nothing was too good for the young prince. He had tennis coaching from the former British champion Dan Maskell, cricket lessons from Len Munser, the head coach at Lord's, and racing driver Graham Hill taught him to drive on the royal estate's private roads. Part of the challenge lay in channeling his natural high spirits and energies, so there was plenty of physical exercise playing football and cricket on the Burton Court fields opposite the Royal Hospital. He became a member of the first Marylebone Wolf Pack, which, on the grounds of security, met weekly at Buckingham Palace. Where Charles was sensitive and thoughtful, Andrew was macho, confident, and extroverted, the sort of son Philip had always wanted. His father taught him to swim and later to shoot and sail, and played football with him. At this stage, the relationship between the two elder brothers was close. It was for Andrew and Edward that Charles wrote the book The Old Man of Lochnagar, and valet Stephen Barry noted that Charles liked to play with his younger brothers when they were small, and they adored him. In September 1968, in order to install some discipline in him, aged 8, Andrew was sent to Heatherdown, a prep school of 80 pupils with strong royal and aristocratic connections. This was probably at the suggestion of the Queen's racing manager and close friend, whose 2 sons were already at the school. Prince Edward would follow his older brother there in 1972, as would David Cameron, who started in 1974. Among former pupils were the actor David Niven and the King of Bhutan. It was here that Andrew made a lifelong best friend, Charles Butter, nephew of his godmother, Lady Kennard. Set in 30 acres near Ascot, Heatherdown was a feeder for Eton, at one time a destination considered for Prince Andrew. The Queen and Prince Philip often appeared at school events in a Rolls-Royce and knew many of the parents socially. A contemporary, Viscount Goshen, remembered it as a charming little school with a miniature steam rail the boys would ride and spending a lot of time building dens in the woods. On sports days, Goshen recalled beetroot-faced colonels taking part in the father's race in the 3 separate lavatories provided, one for ladies, one for gentlemen, and one for chauffeurs. While Andrew was at Heatherdown, the royal family documentary, in 1969, aired on British television, revealing him to be a lively, cheerful boy with a touch of the daredevil, but he also began to display the contrary behavior that would bedevil his life. One moment he would be diligent and polite, the next aggressive and rude. Like his father, he had a short temper, a rather Germanic sense of humor, and did not bear fools gladly. Though the boys were known by their surnames at school, Andrew was always called by his Christian name. During his time at Heatherdown, an IRA plot to kidnap him and his second cousin, the Earl of St. Andrews, was uncovered, which circumscribed some of his activities. A contemporary, Frank Egerton, remembered the boys speculating about whether Andrew's detective, with him at all times, carried a gun. He fitted in, but one was always aware he was a member of the royal family. There was this reserve. One never knew the real Andrew, and I don't remember him having close friends, said Egerton. He was impetuous, and would often say something without thinking, which would get him into trouble. Another Heatherdown pupil from that time recollected Andrew as being quite big for his age, very bumptious, someone who threw his weight around. He was cocky, and had a high opinion of himself. He wasn't the brightest button, and he never made it to the top of the class. One episode stands out for several contemporaries. At some point, a box of exotic stamps went missing. After a search, they were found in Prince Andrew's desk. According to one of his classmates, he had crossed out the name of the owner and put his own name on it. When discovered, he simply shrugged it off. Andrew was a founding member of the school's scouting group, learned judo, and made the first teams for cricket and rugby, but otherwise his time at Heatherdown was not distinguished. Most of his fellow students were headed for English public schools such as Eton and Harrow, but Philip made the family decisions, and he had decided that Andrew would follow him and older brother Charles to Gordonstoun, not least because its remoteness made security easier, and it was less than 2 hours' drive from Balmoral. And so, in the autumn of 1973, Andrew left his friends behind and headed to the very north of Scotland to start the next stage of his education. Well, while he's off doing that, what's Sarah doing? Let's have a little bit about the Fergusons, shall we? Sarah Margaret Ferguson was born 4 months before Andrew on 15 October 1959. Her family, descended from King Charles II, had strong aristocratic and military connections. Her paternal grandmother was the granddaughter of the 6th Duke of Buccleuch, and every generation of her father's family since the 19th century had been commissioned into the Life Guards. Her father, Ronald Ferguson, born in 1931, had been educated at Eton, which he had left early after failing trials twice, and joined the Life Guards as a trooper in 1949 before going to Sandhurst. Sarah's mother, born Susan Wright in 1937, was the granddaughter of the 8th Viscount Powerscourt and daughter of a director of a successful engineering company in Lancashire. The couple married in January 1956, the year after Susan came out as a debutante, at the fashionable St. Margaret's Church in the shadow of Westminster Abbey, with a reception at Claridge's for 600. They began married life at Lowood House in Ascot, a 10-bedroomed Edwardian mansion set in 14 acres of garden with a gate lodge, staff cottage, apple orchard, and tennis court, employing a cook, gardener, stable boy, and after the birth of their first child, Jane Louisa, in August 1957, a nanny. While still in the Army, Ronald started playing polo in 1954, and by 1966 was representing England. He soon found himself in the same team as Prince Philip, and acting as honorary unpaid polo manager for Prince Charles, accompanying him on foreign polo tours. The Queen and Philip often came to dinner at Lowood House, previously lived in by King Zog of Albania, and in return the Fergusons were invited to shoot at Sandringham, or join the Queen's house party at Royal Ascot. Like his father before him, Ferguson rose to command the sovereign's escort, reputedly being told on one occasion by the Queen to fall back when riding beside her. "It's me they've come to see, not you." Ronald served with the Life Guards in Germany, Cyprus, Egypt, and Yemen, and at times would be away for almost a year. Soon Susan, exasperated by her husband's philandering, which she believed had begun in 1961, and included one of her bridesmaids, was having an affair with his polo teammate, Prince Philip. By the end of the 1960s, on the death of his father, Ron had left the army and moved the family to Hampshire, and the 8-bedroom Dummerdown farm, once owned by George IV. Here he ran a mixed arable farm set in 876 acres, with stabling for 6 horses, combining farming with polo and work as consultant for a PR firm, and later running an indoor cricket school. In 1969, a third child, to have been called Sophie, died shortly after birth when Susan developed preeclampsia, with the result that she suffered from postnatal depression. The young Sarah blamed herself. "I remember always believing that must have been my fault. We'd been on holiday in Switzerland, and I had gone to the shops and stayed out longer than I should have. Mum had come looking for me and was so angry when she found me she slapped me across the bottom. As she did so, she fell on the ice, and then she lost the baby. Not straight away, but in my mind it was all because I had stayed out late." How sad that she was left to believe that was the truth. Of course, you would, as a child, have concluded that was your fault because, you're always told if somebody falls when they're pregnant, and loses the baby, it's because of the fall, but preeclampsia had nothing to do with her fall, and I wish somebody would have taken the time to explain that to her because that would have been a big weight to carry. Always competitive and inheriting her parents' equestrian skills, Sarah was soon entering competitions around the country, including the All England Schools Championship in 1968 on her horse Spider. She was also a natural skier, having started at the age of 4. Her mother remembered her courage on the slopes. Sarah was very brave. It was the same with her riding. She'd ride anything and had no fear. By the time she was 10, Sarah's bedroom wall was festooned with rosettes from gymkhanas and county shows. Susan, who taught riding to the children's friends, thought her one of the most natural riders she'd ever seen. When she was little, I could put her on anything and say, "Right, go and jump that," and she would. Sarah could make or somehow will the horse to do whatever she wanted. In 1969, the younger Ferguson started as a weekly boarder at Daneshill, a place of metal beds and horsehair mattresses, 20 miles from Dummer, coming home at weekends. There she acquired her nickname Fergie and made various lifelong friends including Claire Steele, later Wentworth Stanley, and Charlotte Lulu Blacker. The summer of 1972 was to mark in many ways the end of Sarah's childhood and to shape the rest of her life. The Fergusons took a villa in Corfu, inviting a polo-playing friend of Ron's, Hector Borentes, whose wife and unborn child had been killed in a car accident the previous February. The handsome Argentinian beguiled Susan, who was unhappy in her marriage and frustrated at Ron's womanizing. He was then having an affair with the 23-year-old daughter of a colonel. Susan and Hector fell in love, and shortly afterwards, she told her husband she was separating from him. Susan leaving the family home had a profound effect on Sarah, who blamed herself for the divorce, took to comfort eating, and put on weight. Henceforth, she would later claim she suffered from insecurity, a feeling of worthlessness, a need to please others, and found it hard to establish stable relationships. She also had mixed feelings about her mother's abandoning the family to move to London, and then Argentina, ostensibly because she did not want to disrupt the children's education. Looking back on the dramatic events, Sarah remembered, "It was an obsession. She couldn't stop herself. I was angry. I wanted to tell her I loved her and missed her desperately, but I couldn't because I didn't want her to worry about me. She just found her love, and I didn't want to hurt her because she was so happy, and I'd seen her unhappy, so I just ate my emotions. I ate my feelings, which is why I had weight problems from the age of 12. The bond between father and daughter, similar in so many ways, was to be complicated, with Sarah continually in search of a secure father figure. Ron found it hard to cope as a single father, both practically and emotionally. Within a few years, Sarah would acquire a stepmother, Susan Deptford, the 27-year-old daughter of a Norfolk farmer. But at a formative stage in her life, she had gone from being a girl to a young woman without the support of a mother or a sister, as Jane, age 16, had moved to Australia and married. As she put it, "I was 14 and it felt like both the females in my life had abandoned me." The situation was not helped by Sarah leaving Daneshill in 1972 to join her sister Jane, and then already a weekly boarder at Hurst Lodge in Ascot. "I didn't like boarding school," she later remembered. "I missed my mum, and I needed to be with my ponies. They were constant and safe. The ponies understood me." She coped by becoming the class joker, ensuring she was the center of attention, but she was floundering. A summer report read, "Although enthusiastic and anxious to please, Sarah has not yet learned to channel her energies in the right direction. Both work and behavior are erratic, and she needs to exercise greater control over both." Nonetheless, she excelled at tennis and swimming, and captained the netball team, and was jointly made head girl with Fenella Horn. A contemporary, Lisa Mullidor, remembered, "Everyone looked up to Fergie. She was a great source of strength and fun. We all liked her." But she was not academic, and in the summer of 1976 she left Hurst Lodge with 2 O-levels, an A in spoken English and a C in art, but D's in English language, English literature, and biology, which counted as fails, and she also failed French and geography. She decided on a 9-month course in shorthand, typing, and bookkeeping, but first she wanted to see a bit of the world, not least visit her mother in Argentina. This gap year proved an important period. She lost weight, learned some Spanish, reconnected with her mother, and met her first boyfriend. That would be so traumatic to have your mother just leave. And I think, I think as an American, it's easy to think that British children in this upper elite class who spend so much time at boarding school and only see their parents on the weekends must not have the same bond with their parents. I think we have this idea that, well, if your parents decide to leave you and abandon you, what did you really have in the first place? Which I think is very cold and unkind, but I think that there is this sensation, this sort of thought that it must have been hard, but you didn't rely on them the way other children rely on their parents, so you probably did okay. But to the extent that they knew to rely on their parent, to the extent that they had a relationship with their parent, it was as meaningful to them as maybe your relationship is with your parent who you saw every day. It's all relative. So to have a parent just up and abandon you and run after the love of their life in Argentina. So I think for Sarah, who we've already seen has a tendency to blame catastrophe on herself, would not have done well with a mother who left her. This isn't a person who I think was very secure in themselves, because she had already blamed herself for the death of her mother's child, And nobody had ever come around, it seems, to have assured her that's not your fault. Now, of course, we don't know every single person that talked to her about it, or even if people realized that she blamed it on herself. But it seems that she was left often to come to her own conclusions about things. So imagine that personality type that now having a mother who up and leaves and goes to another country. I can only imagine that this overeating that she did would have been one of the only conclusions she could have come to eat her feelings. Because who's there to talk to her about it? Who's there to kind of get her through it? By all accounts, her dad was a rather frustrated individual. He found being a single parent difficult practically and emotionally, as the book says. So it's not like she can go there. Again, her older sister has left. Her older sister now lives in Australia, got married when she was 16. A person who gets married when they're 16 is a person who is running away from home, let me just say. And so where does she have to turn? Home life is not warm. Her mother's left her. Her sister's left her. Both of them completely out of the country. So it's not like I can just see them on breaks and holidays. Completely gone. Imagine the abandonment you would feel. And imagine the coping mechanisms you would come up with. Not just the eating, but even just emotional coping mechanisms that you'd come with. It surprised me not at all that she would then turn into the class clown and that school would seem so unimportant to her. Because scholastics, I think, there's two kinds of people in the world. The people who are forced into school because they're heartbroken and the people who are forced away from school because they're heartbroken. One person loses themselves in the schoolwork and the other person just can't even imagine how they're supposed to find the energy for it. And I think that was probably her situation. I mean, that is abysmal. Her grades are pretty bad. And I don't say that to mock her or anything. It's just what a reflection of the sadness that she was feeling. Okay, our last little section is entitled The Sniggerer. Prince Andrew arrived at Gordonstoun in the autumn of 1973, one of 80 new boys in a school of just over 400, which, since the previous year, also included 60 sixth form girls. Situated in the extreme northeast of Scotland, it had been founded by Kurt Hahn in 1933 at the principle that education should prepare one for life, not just university. The Spartan school emphasized service, self-reliance, and self-discipline, with all pupils engaging in a form of community service which included its own Coast Guard, in which Andrew served, and fire service. His father had been one of Gordonstoun's first pupils, rising to be guardian, or head boy, and captain of cricket, and its philosophy had inspired Philip's founding of the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme. Charles had left just 6 years earlier, having also been guardian. Much was expected of Andrew. The school then was divided, with a third of its students Scottish, a third English, and a third international pupils, and a strict hierarchy stretching from the royal family through the aristocracy, landed gentry, and military families, to the international jet set, nouveau riche, and the rest. Among Andrew's fellow pupils were the sons of the actors Sean Connery and Peter Finch, the daughter of the Duke of Kent, several members of the Mountbatten family, Hobart Earl, the Venezuelan-born future conductor, and members of the Niarchos family. Contemporaries remembered how impressed Andrew appeared to be with extreme wealth. One recollected that the Queen had said that he should be treated like everyone else, but in reality he couldn't be and he didn't want to be. His name was always read out first in roll call, and then everyone else alphabetically. But at one point Andrew decided he had no need to attend in the belief that the rules did not apply to him. He was always a stickler for protocol. He was a pompous git, very aware of his own self-importance, and took advantage of his position. Another felt he didn't know whether he wanted to be a prince or one of the lads. I'm afraid he had a bit of a "I'm the prince" about him when he first arrived, said one friend. But he soon had it knocked out of him. You just cannot get away with that here. The ribbings he got were unmerciful. These included being roughed up so that he had to spend time in the school sanatorium, and being tied up in the back of a bus on the way to a cricket match against a neighboring school at Fort Augustus. He was quickly nicknamed the Sniggerer, or the Great I Am, with a contemporary describing him as a man with a big bottom who laughed at his own jokes, and another that, by the time he'd finished a joke, he's laughing so much he can't understand the punchline. According to Lulu Houseman, also a student at Gordonstoun, Andrew didn't shine at anything and just wanted to have a good time. There was even a story going around the school that he failed some of his O-levels because he spent all his time reading trashy magazines and comics. The prince had been put in the top stream, but he gradually went down. One teacher remembered him being a bit of a Jack the Lad, very social. Not daft, but he did the bare minimum of work, preferring socializing to learning. Wherever he went, he was accompanied by 2 detectives, Steve Burgess, an Oxford graduate, and Keith Topless, who were always catching people smoking. Bored by his duties, Topless often joined Andrew and one of his friends firing at cans on a cliff top. According to one school acquaintance, Andrew was neither sporty, naughty, or bright, but instead moved from group to group. He never quite fitted in anywhere, and people just didn't feel comfortable with him. One of Andrew's closest friends at the school, Tim Radford, arrived the term after him, and they shared a 2-man study bedroom for a year and a 3-man another year. He was discovering who he was, but he did lack judgment. He was an enthusiast, very competitive, and always had an eye for the girls. He's a decent guy, just a normal bloke, though a bit lazy, and at one stage had a talking to by Prince Philip. Peter Nilsson was also in the same house and stayed several weekends at Balmoral, Windsor, and Sandringham. He liked the Queen, who he found a dab hand at crosswords and opened argument. Though fond of Andrew, Nilsson felt he was not always a good judge of character, especially when people were sucking up to him, not streetwise because of his upbringing and too trusting. Another roommate, Andrew Day, an Australian exchange student, recalled the prince testing people on the middle names of the royal family for fun. Day's first impression of his fellow pupil was not encouraging. He rubbed me the wrong way from day one. When I arrived at school, drenched in snow with a backpack, Andrew opened the door. He looked me up and down and scoffed, "You can't come in here. You haven't got any slippers on." Though neither as enthusiastic an actor as his two brothers, while at Gordonstoun, Andrew appeared in a minor role in the farce Simple Spyman, watched by the Queen and Prince Philip. He would later admit he liked acting because he could become someone else. In the summer of 1976, he took his O-levels, but only passed 2, so he had to repeat 5th form. Halfway through his time at Gordonstoun, he had shown himself to be an unremarkable student, more interested in sport and having a good time than his studies or the future. But away from school, plans had always been made. It was now that his royal duties began. And that is where we leave off for now. The next section is entitled "The One with the Robert Redford Looks," and I just don't know where people are getting that. Okay, I mean, look, I don't really care what people look like. Like, you can be as ugly as a burnt stump, whatever. That doesn't matter. What do you like as a person, But I don't understand this necessity to kind of create him as, like, the good-looking royal. I mean, come on, you guys. He's not. I mean, what are we comparing him to? He's okay, but, I mean, I wouldn't give him a second look, And I guess I just feel like the theme that he was the looker, that he would just charm people with his looks, I don't know what we're talking about here. But I'm excited to read this book. I think it's a great, great, great read. And the things that will be revealed will just shock you. And there's reporting in this book, too, that's going to talk about his connections to Epstein and a lot of other very contemporary situations and arguments and topics of conversation that are new to this book. The reporting in this book is just really revealing. So I'm really excited to keep going in this. But all this early stuff is also really interesting because it isn't as though he became obnoxious. He was obnoxious. And it appears that he was raised to be obnoxious because no one ever stopped him. Everyone just gave him everything he wanted. What could we have expected that he would become? All right, well, I will talk to you guys later. It's so fun to hang out with you. I'll see you tomorrow with another installment. Bye.